Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Okay, today we are still in the third chapter, Interrogation and Intuition. And basically today we're going to keep working our way through a discussion of this fact-essence division that we started talking about in the last video. So we've got a bit more to say about this. This will lead us to the idea of a visible present. And Merleau-Ponty has a bit to say here. And then we will, in the second part of the video, there are a few small but important topics that Merleau-Ponty just kind of briefly hints at in the text. But they're, like I say, small but important, and important enough to that I felt it's worth pointing them out in the video. So we'll have a look at those in the second part. First part of the video, fact versus essence. Now in the last video we talked about the idea that essence isn't the originary source that we're looking for. It's not being. Furthermore, there is no such thing as a pure essence. The apprehension of a pure essence would require that we be pure spectators, which we are not. And there's one last thing Merleau-Ponty says we might be tempted to do here, and that is to think of the essence as an ideal limit. So a limit kind of that we therefore can't apprehend. We can't grasp it. It's there, but it's inapprehensible to us. It's inaccessible. And Merleau-Ponty says this idea only makes sense if we presuppose the fact-essence distinction. And in fact, the whole idea of fact versus essence, the whole notion that this is a thing, is one that only makes sense if we have already presupposed it. And this is kind of Merleau-Ponty's last, the last nail in the coffin, if you like. The factor-essence division is something that has been presupposed and is therefore worthy of being questioned. And when we question it, we discover that it's actually not originary. It is on account of having begun with the antithesis of the fact and the essence, of what is individuated in a point of space and time, and what is from forever and nowhere, that one is finally led to treat the essence as a limit idea, that is, to make it inaccessible. For this is what obliged us to dream of a variation of the thing that would eliminate from it all that is not authentically itself, and would make it appear all naked, whereas it is always clothed. So fact, essence, we imagine, without even necessarily questioning it, we immediately assume things must possess a pure essence. There must be an essential core to the thing that is invariant, that is unchanging, that's universal. And this is what how Merleau-Ponty describes as naked. But he says, in actual fact, when we do question this assumption, we discover that the thing is always a fact. The thing is always clothed. It always appears as an individual, a thing individuated in a point of space and time. So rather than there being this core nugget, an essential essence that makes up a thing, the thing is always the fact, the empirical thing that we observe. And that is the way that Merleau-Ponty dismisses this whole fact versus essence dualism, and we can call it a dualism. I think that's a fair enough word to use here, although Merleau-Ponty doesn't use it. But this is also a good example of how hidden presuppositions can influence our thinking and take us in directions that we might not necessarily have gone if we questioned some of our more basic assumptions. It sounds plausible, that's the problem. We immediately begin with this idea. There's a fact and essence split. And that's, in fact, what Husserl does at the very beginning of Ideas 1. He starts with the fact-essence split. And then the whole project of phenomenology afterwards is really about this the search for essences, identifying what the invariant, unchanging aspects of the things are, of things are. And if you start with that, if you don't question that, then you run the risk of going down a path that you don't want to go down. And in fact, that's what Merleau-Ponty says here. This presupposition that there is a fact-essence split sends us on a bit of a wild goose chase. So presupposing a fact-essence division requires that we think of ourselves as pure spectators. We've already talked about this, detached, soaring above the world and things which are then spread out beneath me. And Merleau-Ponty introduces a word here, Kosmotheoros, which means beholder of the cosmos. So I am completely removed, such that to give things their individual times and spaces, to apprehend things in their as facts, as empirical facts, with a certain time, with a certain space, I must be timeless and spaceless. I must be at a zero point of being, Merleau-Ponty says. And that's quite a nice way to think about this, how we imagine ourselves when we're thinking about being. We imagine ourselves as outside of being. When we're thinking about things and trying to understand what a thing is, we imagine ourselves removed from the thing, at a distance from it, observing it as an impartial spectator, a Kosmotheoros. But he asks, is this the case? Is being Kosmotheoros my ultimate reality? Am I primitively the power to contemplate, a pure look which fixes the things in their temporal and local place, and the essences in an invisible heaven? Am I this ray of knowing that would have to arise from nowhere? We already know the answer to this. It's no. Merleau-Ponty says, even while I'm installing myself at the zero point of being, detached, removed from everything so that I can impartially, objectively grasp the facts of the situation, even as I do that, I know very well that this position I'm putting myself in, detached and removed, has a mysterious tie with locality and temporality. So even as I imagine myself looking out and try to remove myself from the picture so that I can get an accurate understanding, I know that there is still time and space. Time and space still applies to me. I'm not distancing myself. I'm unable to distance myself from the thing and from the world. In other words, even though I imagine myself as a pure spectator in order to grasp the things, the world, being itself, I'm actually in time and space myself. And this is the secret to the fact that there is a visible present in the first place. And this is really the main point of this section, that the fact that I am in the world with other things and in the world in the same way as other things is what allows other things to appear as things in the first place. It's what allows there to be this visible present. For the visible present is not in time and space, nor, of course, outside of them. There is nothing before it, after it, about it, that could compete with its visibility. The visible can thus fill me and occupy me only because I who see it do not see it from the depths of nothingness, but from the midst of itself. I, the seer, am also visible. What makes the weight, the thickness, the flesh of each colour, of each sound, of each tactile texture, of the present and of the world, is the fact that he who grasps them feels himself emerge from them by a sort of coiling up or redoubling, fundamentally homogeneous with them. He feels that he is the sensible itself coming to itself, and that in return the sensible is, in his eyes as it were, his double or an extension of his own flesh. The things, here, there, now, then, are no longer in themselves, in their own place, in their own time. They exist only at the end of those rays of spatiality and temporality emitted in the secrecy of my flesh. And their solidity is not that of a pure object which the mind soars over. I experience their solidity from within, insofar as I am among them, and insofar as they communicate through me as a sentient thing. So a long quote, but there's a lot of, I think a lot is kind of explained in that, so I wanted to give you the whole thing. And a few points to just kind of focus us in on this a little bit and pull out the main ideas. The first thing is this idea of the visible present. Merleau-Ponty here is making the visible present originary. As he says, there's nothing before it, nothing after it, nothing about it that could compete. This is where things begin for Merleau-Ponty. This is where everything begins, the visible present. It starts with this. It doesn't start with me as a subject or a nothingness or an ego or a mind. It doesn't start with the world, things, matter, cosmos. It doesn't start with that either. Because those are already abstractions. What starts, where we start, is the visible present. And then when we can break that apart into these divisions, a subject and an object, mind and matter, and so on and so forth. But those are abstractions. The original starting point, the source, is the visible present. That's where things begin for Merleau-Ponty. And that's difficult to grasp because it's not the way we naturally think. Right? We naturally imagine if there is a visible present, there must be something to be seen, right? There must be something that is visible, and there must be something or someone seeing it. That it just makes sense. It's logical. It's rational. But that's the problem. We're moving beyond logic. We talked about this already. Language, logic, concepts, reason, these things all fail us when we come to describing the world itself, being itself. Because these terms, these things, apply to things in the world. They don't apply then to the world itself. So the visible present is originary. Doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but that's what's originary. That's the source, this visible present. Another way to think about this, which might make things a little bit clearer, although it won't make things logical because it's not logical, is that we're not talking about a seer and the thing, but we're talking about the thing seen. That's the start. Not a seer, not a thing, but the thing seen. That's where it begins. And the thing and the seer are abstractions taken out of this originary whole. I guess I could you could probably call it. So the visible present, that's the emphasis here. You might say here, what about the invisible? I mean, it's in the title, right? Visible and the invisible. And we'll come back to this idea later. We'll see that the visible present is laced with invisible points of articulation, if you like. It's laced with invisible traces which give this visible present its depth and its contours. But we're getting ahead of ourselves with that. At the moment, we're at the visible present, and that is what is originary. So let's have a look at the two abstractions that come out of this then, and see if we can understand them within the whole of the originary present. So the two abstractions are I and the thing. So if we start with I as a seer, in order for this visible present to be what it is, this originary whole, I must be in the world. I must be one visible thing among other visible things. And in fact, that's what Merleau-Ponty says when he says I must be fundamentally homogeneous with them, with other things. So I'm not detached, I'm not transcendent, I'm not an impartial spectator. I am thrust into the world, visible like all the other visible things around me. So I'm not detached, I'm not transcendent, but I'm also I'm not detached or transcendent just with a thing part. So that would be another way to get this idea wrong, to think that, yeah, I'm in the world, say, as a physical body, but I also have this other half of me, this other part of me, which is transcendent and detached and is like a subject or a mind, something like that. That is back to dualistic thinking. So Merleau-Ponty is very clear on this. We aren't that kind of thing. The seer that I am is not that kind of thing. I'm fundamentally homogeneous with visible things. So in the visible present then, I am the sensible itself coming to itself. And that's taken directly from that quote, and it's a really important line, I think. I am the sensible itself coming to itself. And this captures the fact that, first of all, I'm not an inward something. I'm not an internal realm as opposed to an external realm, right? So I'm not, again, mind, subject, ego, looking out on an external reality. But I'm a part of the world such that the thing is a thing through me. And that's really the key. The thing is the thing that it is only because it becomes that thing through me. I'm like a facilitator in this. I'm not doing anything. I'm not an active subject constituting anything. I'm not creating anything. There are no representations in a mind, which would be internal as opposed to the external reality. All of that has to go. I am simply the sensible itself coming to itself. I'm that which allows this thing to be a thing. And if you can grasp that, then half the battle's done, because then you're not thinking of yourself as another thing over and above other things around you. You're not thinking of yourself as an internal thing, as a mind, as a subject, over and above these other things. And that's the key to getting this. Furthermore, I emerge as an I from this world of things by a redoubling. And that's a nice word as well. Redoubling, and as soon as we hear that, when we're thinking about we imagine the doubling takes place through some kind of mental representation. The thing is over there. I form a mental idea, concept, representation of it, and that's the double. But that is just straight, it's placing us right back into the Cartesian theatre, right? So we don't want to do that. That's not what redoubling means here. The doubling happens through the sensible, not just being, which actually doesn't mean anything in Merleau-Ponty's philosophy here. We can't just say the sensible is on its own. It's not independent. It's not. It doesn't exist without existing through me, and that's the double. That's the doubling here. That the thing exists. It is, but it is only through me and my experience. So if I can bring us back to what I've written here, the double is doubling not through. It's a doubling through the sensible, not just being, but being seen, and that's the idea. So we're back again to this visible present, not just the thing, but the thing seen. And that's the redoubling that Merleau-Ponty is talking about. And that's what I am. I am the sensible coming to itself. And that's the sense of redoubling that Merleau-Ponty is getting at. And I want to emphasize that because I think it's an important idea, and it's going to come back when we talk about the thing as well in a moment. So before we talk about the thing, just note that this idea of being fundamentally homogeneous with the thing is not to say that I'm the same as the thing. Rather, it's to say that I am in the world the same as the thing. That is to say, I'm in the world as body, as flesh. So what's the difference? I mean, I can't be exactly the same as a table, because the table doesn't disclose anything. A table doesn't allow the sensible things to come to themselves, right, like I do. So what's the difference? Even though I'm in the world in the same way as other things, I'm visible in the same way as other things are visible, there must still be a difference. The difference is that the thing I am, the kind of visible that I am, the body that I am, is this field of experience. And again, the important thing is to grasp that is what I as body am, not I as this extra thing over and above my body, as this transcendental subject or ego or mind. I as this body am a field of experience. That is what my body is. So there is no duality here. There's no dualism. So that's I. Let's turn to talk about the thing. So the thing is not in itself. It's not an independent, pure solidity. Rather, Merleau-Ponty says, I experience the thing's solidity from within because I am among the things, and they communicate through me. Again, fundamentally homogeneous with them. So the thing then, the sensible, Merleau-Ponty says in that quote, is a double or an extension of my own flesh. So two things about that idea. First, this is again emphasizing the close connection between me and the thing, such that it's so close that we can't even say it's a relation, right? It's not an actual connection which would require two pre-existent things, because these two things don't exist prior to that intertwining. And that it's a good word to use, because that's exactly the word Merleau-Ponty is going to use later. That intertwining between me and the thing is in such a way that there is no me prior to it and there is no thing prior to it. That intertwining is what makes me and the thing in the first place, and it's what allows me and the thing to be abstracted out later. So this idea is again emphasizing this close, inextricable connection. A second, the thing is a double of my own flesh. There's that word again, redoubling. When we saw redoubling when we were talking about I, and now a doubling again when we're talking about the thing. The thing is a double of my own flesh. Not just the thing, but the thing seen. And that's the doubling again. When it's not just the thing, but it's the thing seen. There's like a doubling, or to use Merleau-Ponty's own words, there's a redoubling here, which gives the thing its thingliness, and which gives me my I-ness, my ipseity. And so that doubling features in both sides of what can later be abstracted out of this originary present, this visible present. And that's the parallel. That's the parallel that I wanted to draw to your attention. I am the sensible coming to itself, and the thing is a double or extension of my flesh. So those two things are essentially describing the exact same process, right? It's just that the I emerges, the I and the thing both emerge out of this more originary, visible present. There's no other way to describe it, but it's that which is first, if we want to confuse things by talking in terms of temporality. It's that which is prior, perhaps that's a better word. So the flesh of the world then is that concrete lived aspect the world has as visible present. The weight, thickness, colour, all of those things that Merleau-Ponty mentions. And this is precisely the coiling up or redoubling. I am the sensible coming to itself. The sensible is a double of my own flesh. And all of this is possible only because I'm fundamentally homogeneous with the things. That is, I'm in the world, visible like and with other things. And so that's kind of my summary of that quote, which is a really important quote. All of the key ideas are in there. So it was important, and it is important to make sure you have that kind of under your belt as we go on. So coming back to fact and essence then. Fact and essence cannot be separated out, not because they are like intertwined in such a complicated fashion that we can't pass them out, or that essence is some kind of ideal limit that we don't have access to. Rather, fact and essence can't be divided like this, separated out, is because the thing's essence, what a thing really is its facticity, the way it appears as an individuated thing in time and space. And that's what Merleau-Ponty said when he said that a thing is always clothed. The essence is always a fact. The thing's essence is its facticity. Fact and essence can no longer be distinguished because being no longer being before me, but surrounding me and in a sense traversing me, and my vision of being not forming itself from elsewhere, but from the midst of being, the alleged facts, the spatio-temporal individuals, are from the first mounted on the axes, the pivots, the dimensions, the generality of my body, and the ideas are therefore already encrusted in its joints. So a thing's essence is its facticity, because things are things only through an intertwining with me as a body in the visible present, i.e. as spatiotemporal individuals. Things are only things as they appear in the visible present. There is no prior realm where things are things as they are in and of themselves. That is, it just doesn't exist. Merleau-Ponty's ontological bedrock here is this visible present. It's where his ontology begins. It's where he says ontology begins. There is no being prior to this. Thus, the thing, as fact, is formed through or out of my body. Merleau-Ponty says it's mounted on the axes, the pivots, the dimensions, the generality of my body. That's such a great line, right? It's the thing is formed through my body, not in relation to my body. I'm not a body over here and the thing is over there and there's some kind of interplay here. The thing is the thing only through my body, and that's what my body is. It's that opening, it's that field. It's the same thing that Heidegger tried to explain when he talked about the clearing, Dasein as the clearing. I am not a thing opposed to other things. I am, or different from other things. I am this space which allows things to be things. And I am this space, I can be this space only because I'm in the world with things. I am a body, visible like other visible things. So the thing is always mounted on, it's just such a great line, mounted on the axes, the pivots, the dimensions and the generality of my body. And our ideas of essences, for example, are also encrusted in the body's joints. Again, they are formed through my body, not in some kind of mental realm, not in an inward, internal domain separate from the external. None of that applies here. Ideas are formed through my body. And by this, Merleau-Ponty means that thought has evolved in the world, right? We are beings in the world. We've evolved within the world to understand other beings in the world. So we're thoroughly enmeshed in being, in the world itself, as a visible object like other visible objects. But because our thought has evolved in this way to understand other things in the world, it's inadequate to understanding the world itself, to understanding being itself. And this is why it doesn't gel with our logical, rational minds. That's why this idea that the visible present is prior to an I and a thing, it doesn't quite sit right, because the way our thinking has evolved, the furrows that our thinking follows are furrows that operate within the world, that deal with worldly things. I call it parts-based thinking, and that's derived from Bergson's metaphysics, but the same thing applies here. We've evolved to think in terms of parts. So when we try and think in terms of the whole, our thinking breaks down. It just doesn't work. Things don't seem to make sense, and they don't, because our thinking is inadequate for that. And the way that we think is it's parts-based, not whole-based. And there's a world of difference between those two. Which doesn't mean, and I always say this, it doesn't mean that to say that it's not rational, it's not logical, doesn't mean that anything goes, doesn't mean that we can start talking irrationally and making things up and that any explanation is as good as any other. It just means that the final picture won't gel with the concepts and the categories that we think within. There's going to be an ill fit, and we must expect that. But again, it doesn't mean that any and everything is then on the table. It just means that we have to be aware of this and allow for it. So on the back of all of this, Merleau-Ponty suggests that we might even be better off to redefine the word essence as, instead of meaning beyond facts, which presupposes that fact-essence division, we take essence to mean at the heart of that coiling up of experience over experience. So essentially, instead of taking essence out of the world of facts and experience, Merleau-Ponty wants to put it back at the center of that world, the center of facts, the center of experience. And that's essentially the key. And that's what I meant when I said the thing's essence is its facticity. But Merleau-Ponty wants to put the essence back into the world of facts, the world of experience, where it belongs, because there's nowhere else for it to be. And this again highlights the importance of experience for Merleau-Ponty. Experience is where his ontology begins. There's nothing prior to that. There's nothing prior to experience, the visible present, that would make sense to call a thing. Being the word just doesn't mean anything prior to experience. Rather than the thing, we're talking about the thing seen, and that's the visible present. So ultimately, rather than a fact-essence split, Merleau-Ponty is putting forth the idea of an indecisive milieu. From the first, he says there is an environment of brute existence and essence. The facts and the essences are abstractions we draw out of this originary source. And the indecisive milieu is, just to bring in some other post-Merleau-Pontian thought, exactly what Deleuze talks about. Although he talks about it in a metaphysical register with the idea arising from an undetermined virtual multiplicity, it's the same idea, it's the same thing here. He says there's nothing there, it's completely undetermined. There are no things interacting with other things until intensity kicks in and you get these differences forming within different parts of the idea, and that's what generates things in the first place. Prior to that, there are no things, there are no relationships, because there's no thing to have a relationship. And it's exactly what Merleau-Ponty is saying here, with his idea of this indecisive milieu, an environment of brute existence and essence. There is no thing here until we get that, and how this is the way Merleau-Ponty describes it, that redoubling, which is the way that Merleau-Ponty talks about something coming about, and that thing comes about in the visible present. So the indecisive milieu cannot be labelled, Merleau-Ponty says, but for all of that, it's not mysterious, precisely because we live in it. It is, he says, the very sphere of our life and of our life of knowledge. It can't be labelled because all of the labels that we have were made possible only through this milieu. So the labels, again, it's the same idea. The labels that we have can't apply to the thing that lets there be labels in the first place. But it's not mysterious because it's everything to us. It's what we live. It's how we live. It's the things that we see. It's our, not just our lives, but our lives of knowledge. The things that we know. It's the things plus our knowledge of them. It's the things plus our ideas of the things. And it's the very stuff we move within. It's the very essence is the word, but it's the very essence of our lives. And therefore it can't be mysterious because there's nothing closer to us. There's nothing more intimate for us than this indecisive milieu out of which everything emerges for us. Okay. Let's have a look at the second part of the video, which is knowing being, consciousness, and speech. So first up, knowing being here. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but Merleau-Ponty goes beyond what we've said in the past. And I've mentioned this before, but this is kind of a feature of all of these texts. And I think maybe of good philosophy, is there is a lot of repetition, but each repetition expands on the core idea in some way. So a repetition that perhaps approaches the topic from a different direction, giving you another bite at the apple, if you like, but then it also extends that idea and slowly and steadily kind of moves out in that way. And I think that's a hallmark of good writing. But anyway, how can we know being? We must go beyond reflection, beyond language, beyond concepts, beyond logic. We've talked about this, to a hyper-reflection. And Merleau-Ponty says also we must refuse to go within to mind. Instead, we have to go outside, including the body, because that's where being is. Before the essence as before the fact. All we must do is situate ourselves within the being we are dealing with, instead of looking at it from the outside. Or what amounts to the same thing, what we have to do is put it back into the fabric of our life. Attend from within to the dehiscence, analogous to that of my own body, which opens it to itself and opens us upon it. So we have to situate ourselves within the thing. That's what Merleau-Ponty says. Not obviously in some hackneyed mystical or spiritual sense, which is still dualistic, right? I am here, merging somehow with that over there. Rather, it's a fundamental change in the way that we think. So instead of thinking dualist in a dualistic fashion from the start, me versus the thing, we immediately place ourselves, by that Merleau-Ponty means our thinking, in the thing. Put the thing back into the whole. And essentially that's what this is. He's talking about what I call whole-based thinking instead of parts-based thinking. And that's what he means when he says putting the thing back into the fabric of our life. Instead of treating these things as me and the thing as separate, we have to grasp the whole picture, see the whole rather than the parts. And you have something similar with, and this is kind of a weird thing to throw up maybe, but I thought of this here, the flat ontology of object-oriented ontology goes too far here with this. So it does the same thing. It thinks in terms of the objects, every object, but it gets rid of any special object. It takes away the privilege that is the human object, the body, because it's a flat ontology. It wants to one of the things about object-oriented ontology I found is that it wants to get rid of anthropomorphocentric thinking, which is I'm totally not on board with that, and doesn't fit in at all with what Merleau-Ponty's talking about, which is why I mention it, because it does have something in common though, because it aims to think the things as they are in this kind of flat sphere. But the problem is, if to think a thing in a flat ontology, the thing is nothing then, because there is no object which allows other objects to be. There is no field of experience in this case, in which case, it's a non-starter for us, but it has that same, I guess it has a similar goal. It tries to understand everything on a flat, it tries to understand everything within the whole. The problem is it reduces everything in the whole to the same. And so it levels everything down, which doesn't fit in with what Merleau-Ponty's doing. So I say the flat ontology of object-oriented ontology goes too far in this direction. Another thing that's worth mentioning here is that what Merleau-Ponty's describing here, putting the thing back into the fabric of our life, is almost exactly what Bergson had in mind with his intuition. His intuition was an attempt to, again, not merge with the thing in some mystical fashion, but to go from parts-based thinking to whole-based thinking, to think the thing in the whole and understand it as a part, but as a part of the whole rather than an isolated, independent feature. Okay, so that's knowing being. The second thing I wanted to discuss here is consciousness. And Merleau-Ponty doesn't say much about this. It just kind of crops up in a small section, but it's definitely worth focusing on. So the passage is this: my body, which is one of the visibles, sees itself also, and thereby makes itself the natural light, opening its own interior to the visible, in order for the visible there to become my own landscape, realizing, as it is said, the miraculous promotion of being to consciousness, or, as we prefer to say, the segregation of the within and the without. So that's maybe not so clear, but essentially what I get from this quote is it's an answer to the question, what is consciousness? And there are two aspects to it. First, when I perceive objects through my eyes, through my visual cortex, that whole process, they exist through the perspective that I bring to them. And Merleau-Ponty, there's an interesting twist here on Descartes' natural light. The natural light that Merleau-Ponty is talking about is this perspective that I bring, that allows things to appear as things, that allows perception to take place. So that's our natural light, this perspective I bring, which opens up this space for things to be things. But the same can be said when the object that I'm perceiving is my own body. And in this case, again, my body as this special body, not just a lump of matter with organs and muscles and so on and so forth, but my body as this field of awareness, field of experience. So when I do this, when I direct this natural light to my body, then it exists through the perspective that I bring to it. However, since the object that I'm perceiving, my body as flesh, is the center of that perspective, then that perspective appears charged with a heightened sense of individuality. And that heightened sense of individuality is precisely what we call consciousness. And that's quite nice, I think. Merleau-Ponty's captured something essential about this, something that is essential to consciousness. Perhaps it's not an explanation of consciousness. I think for that you'd have to go to metaphysics, but I think it's a good ontological description of consciousness. I as body, as flesh, as this field of awareness that is this body, create the space in which things can appear as things. So this is the natural light, that perspective that I cause to come about. When I direct that upon myself, when I direct that natural light, that perspective upon myself, which I'm able to do because I'm in the world as a visible among other visibles, when I direct that upon myself, my body, that perspective then appears charged it's given a kind of a boost of extra individuality, because it's directed back upon itself, because the object that I'm viewing, that I'm perceiving, is the very center of that perspective in the first place. It just kind of, you get this redoubling again, right? There's a kind of redoubling taking place, but instead of the redoubling happening to a sensible thing, it's happening to the visible thing that is the perspective itself. And that just gives it this kick that gives this special kind of I-ness, this ipseity to that thing. And that, I think, is a very good description of what consciousness is. Consciousness has been so badly described and explained and defined, I think, that it's almost impossible to make sense of now. But I think this is a nice description. It captures that kind of ineffable, intangible, it's been described as something it's like to be me. That Merleau-Ponty's captured that feeling, that phenomenon, with this description, I think. So I think this is nice. That's a nice way to talk about consciousness. And essentially all that's happening with this heightened sense of individuality, it's actually nothing more than what it feels like when being fractures, if I can use that word without sounding too Deleuzian, when being fractures into a within and a without. That's what consciousness is. Consciousness is this feeling that arises when you get this split in being, and that split arises through the self-directing of this perspective, through the directing of that perspective back upon my own body, generates the split, and that's what the feeling that we call consciousness is. Okay, anyway, let me leave it there and turn to the last thing we're going to look at today, which is speech. But what we've just said with regard to the body, the way the body directs, or the way that my perspective is directed back upon my own body, we can also say the same thing for speech. Speech, in the eyes of science, is, as a constituted language, a certain region in the universe of significations, but it is also the organ and the resonator of all the other regions of signification, and consequently coextensive with the thinkable. Like the flesh of the visible, speech is a total part of the significations. Like it, speech is a relation to being through a being. So another kind of difficult quote, I think, But essentially, speech is a being and existent in the world like other beings, like other things, including my body. It's a certain region in the universe of significations. That's what Merleau-Ponty means by that. Speech is a being. Although it's not physical, obviously, but that doesn't matter. It's in the world like other things, including my body, but like my body, it is not just another thing. It is also a natural light. It is one of those, it's a means of opening up other things. It creates a space in which other things can be things and can be and become thinkable. And that's what Merleau-Ponty means when he says it is also the organ and the resonator of all of the other regions of signification. So it's in the world, it's a being, it's an existent, but at the same time it's a being that allows other beings to come about, to arise. So it's a being with this natural light, as Merleau-Ponty called it in our last quote. So the parallel, the body, in order to work as a natural light, opening up other things to be visible, must also itself be visible. Speech, in order to work as a natural light, opening up other things to be thought, must itself be thinkable. If it's going to be able to open up a region for thought, it itself must be able to appear in the region of thinkable things. And that's, again, I mean, we've seen this idea come up again and again in this video. In order for things to be things, I, as the seer, must be enmeshed in the world, homogeneous with the things. And it's the same with speech. In order for speech to operate as this thing that allows other things to be thought, it must itself be in the world of thinkable things. It has to be enmeshed in that world so that it can reveal other things in that world, other ideas, other concepts. And Merleau-Ponty actually says there's much more than a parallel or an analogy here. Speech prolongs into the invisible, extends unto the semantic operations, the belongingness of the body to being, and the corporeal relevance of every being. So speech is precisely the visible body extended to the invisible, semantic or intelligible. Thus, the origin or the source is the body. Everything comes back to the fact that we are bodies, we are flesh, in the world, fundamentally homogeneous with other things, visible in the same way that other things are visible. And then we're back to the quote from earlier. Facts are from the first mounted on the axes, the pivots, the dimensions, the generality of my body, and the ideas are therefore already encrusted in its joints. And all Merleau-Ponty's doing here is saying that speech is another one of those. It's another one of these things. It's closely related to ideas because it's how we articulate our thoughts. And it also comes back to the body. So everything's centered in the fact of our bodily existence. We are in the world visible like other visible things. And that brings me to our summary. So first up, we looked at fact versus essence. And this was, Merleau-Ponty said, a presupposed dualism. Actually, he didn't use the word dualism, but he said it's presupposed. So it's an assumption that we don't usually question, or is not questioned, and so we find this split kind of governs our thinking from the very beginning. If we adopt this fact essence split, this dualism, then we move off on a tangent from according to Merleau-Ponty. So the fact essence split is presupposed, and it needs to be questioned. When we do question it, we discover that fact and essence are actually abstractions. So they're abstracted out of a more originary situation. And this originary situation is such that a thing's essence is actually its facticity. And the nice way that Merleau-Ponty put this, he says the thing is always clothed. So a thing's essence is its facticity. There is no split between them. They're actually the same. And this led us to talk about the visible present. And the visible present is originary. So it's not, in the way I described this, it's not a seer and a thing, but the thing seen. And that sounds backwards. It doesn't make sense to try and grasp this logically, because how can there be a thing seen without a thing or a seer? But as we discussed, the seer and the thing are abstracted out of this more primordial thing, the visible present, the thing seen. So there was a nice parallel here between I and the thing. I am a redoubling in which the sensible comes to itself, and the thing is a double of my own flesh. And this kind of interesting mirroring, if you like, emphasizes the intertwined nature of me and the world. Intertwined in such a way that, again, it's not the world over here and I over there interacting in some way, but there is no I and me. There is no I and world prior to this visible present in which the sensible comes to itself as I, and the thing is this doubling of my own flesh. And this visible present arises from an indecisive milieu, and as Merleau-Ponty put it, environment of brute existence and essence combined together. It's not, this indecisive milieu it can't be labelled, we said, but it's not mysterious because it's the very life which we live. It's the life of knowledge. It's the things that we know. Our entire existence takes place within this, so it's not mysterious. There's nothing more intimate and well known to us than this, but because of that, in fact, because it's so close to us, we can't get a perspective on it. We can't step back from it and see it the way that it is. And that means that it can't be labelled. And as I said earlier, all of our labels arise within this indecisive milieu, out of this indecisive milieu, so the labels can't apply to that milieu itself. Then in the second part, we looked at knowing being first. Here, Merleau-Ponty says we must situate ourselves within the thing, not in a spiritual or mystical sense, but this is a change in the way we think, so thinking in terms of wholes rather than parts. This is Bergsonian intuition. And we also looked at consciousness, which Merleau-Ponty described as a heightened sense of individuality that arises when we turn the natural light of our perspective onto our body. Crucially, this means that our body must be, again, in the world, visible like other visible things. And this self-reflexive movement is what generates this feeling that we call consciousness. And essentially what it is, the feeling, is what happens when being is fractured into a within and a without. That turning back on ourselves of the natural light of experience, the natural light of perspective, has the effect of fracturing being into a within and a without. And again, that is exactly what we experience as consciousness. And finally, speech. The double aspect of speech. Speech is a being, but it's also an opening onto other beings. So like the body, but the body is the sensible that opens up other things as sensibles. Speech is the intelligible or thinkable that opens up other things as thoughts or ideas. And essentially this also comes back to the body. Everything comes back to the body for Merleau-Ponty. Speech is the operation of the visible body extended into the invisible, intelligible. So again, the body is originary. Ideas are already encrusted in the joints of our body. And that's us for another video. Thanks for watching. Hopefully it helped. I'll see you in the next one.